Fancy. Yeah.
We are now live and we're now recording.
Okay, so good morning. Today's Thursday, April 20th. It's a little after 8:30, and this is the Finance Committee of the Darien Board of Education. Looks like our next meeting will be May 18th. And so just running down our agenda, the first item is a review March 2023 financial report. Rich.
So the financial report through March shows a positive balance of $864,678. The change from the previous month is a little over $137,000. Really only one change makes up the bulk of that, which we'll go over. But the changes include $1,070 for additional parking fees, and that's really just a product of when the students turned eligible to drive. Reduction of $4,500 for a long-term substitute for a paraprofessional. $285 for additional gate receipts for basketball. Deficit of $1,080 for the Board of Ed's share for the donation of the French horn that was accepted at the last meeting. This is the one transfer that we'll recommend. And then finally, the biggest change, $141,756 for additional excess costs. Our reimbursement rate has been increased from 70% to 73.7% from the state of Connecticut. And we did include in the packet the estimated revenues from the state of Connecticut. We should receive that balance at the end of May. So the general education RCs total a positive $161,470, which is relatively consistent with the prior months. And the special education RCs are a positive $703,208. And again, that's primarily all related to excess cost reimbursement for the total of $864,678. As I mentioned earlier, the parking fees at DHS are a positive balance of just over $4,000. There are no changes in RC3, RC5, RC7, 8, 10, 11. Excuse me, 11 is the slight increase in gate receipts for basketball. French horn in RC13, you'll see the negative balance of $1,080, which is for that donation again of the French horn. No change in RC20, 23, and then again in RC24. As I mentioned just earlier, we are having a reimbursement rate of 73.71 for a total reimbursement for excess cost of $2,816,522. And again, the final balance should be received at the end of May, and we've received about $1.8 million of that $2.8 million. Those are really the only real changes in terms of financial report for the month of March.
So one clarification, isn't it an English horn?
Oh, is it an English one? It could be an English
I remember the double reed, bigger oboe
Okay.
type thing, right? That's the thing we're talking about, the instrument we're talking, okay. Just fix that for the,
Yep.
so we don't get confused. Go ahead.
It should be on. no?
Okay, I'm sorry, it's
Yeah.
different than the
Yeah,
one over there.
you're good.
So Rich, question for you about ECR. Can you just remind me how we submit? It's based on projected services and changes of kids coming in and out of the district each year, right?
Yep. So we have two submissions. The first is December 1st. So you pick up the actuals from essentially July through that early, December 1st, and then a forecast from December 1st through June 30th. And then you have another submission on March 1st. So you're picking up the actuals for essentially the end of February, and then a forecast from March 1st through June 30th. That's what your reimbursement is. And then at the end of the year, the district gets audited every year, including ECR. And so if there's any changes in the actuals from March 1st to June 30th, the state does what's called an ECR adjustment. And so that could be positive or negative, depending on if either more services or less services, whatever it might be. And then that change is tied to ECS in the following year. And the ECS reimbursement, which is the educational cost share, goes directly to the town. And so typically what you'll see is our normal, ECS reimbursement for the town's about $500,000. In a normal year, the ECR adjustment is, plus or minus $50,000, depending on how it went. The previous year, it was actually a lot more because there was an out-of-district facility that wasn't state approved, that became state approved. And so the ECR adjustment that attached to ECS was about $300,000 for this current year. That money goes directly to the town because it's tied to ECS.
Okay, thank you. So my question here, and it sounds like you might have talked about it a little bit when you referred to actuals, is this year in particular, we heard a lot about missed services. So I'm curious about where that reconciliation happens between what we're projecting versus the services that children are actually receiving. So is that where you're talking about the audit?
So if those missed services start to get made up, let's say post December 1st into the second half of the year, that gets picked up in the March 1st filing.
Mm-hmm.
If the missed services end up getting picked up post March 1st, that'll get changed in that audit.
And what about when they're not made up?
Well, then there's no expenses to submit for.
So I guess I'm having trouble understanding how we know that, because one of the issues that we found this year was that we didn't really have a tracking system universally in place. And I'm hearing still from a couple of parents recently, one saying that they're 50 plus, one saying that they're 80 plus. And there just doesn't seem to be enough time between now and the end of, by June 30th to get those in. So I'm curious how we know what we actually fulfilled versus what we projected.
Sure. So what's fulfilled, I would probably have to defer to Shirley. If additional services aren't made up, let's say by June 30th, a lot of times what will happen is it's made up in ESY. So if it's made up in ESY, that becomes an excess cost reimbursement for the following year because it happened post.
Okay, so it sounds like, to follow up with Shirley more about where the actual fulfilled services and where that discrepancy is.
Yeah, and go ahead, sir. I would just say, let's understanding you're hearing directly from parents, but I guess the question is, if we do have missed services, you will let us know if there's ESY services that are needed to be remedied over.
Well, if there's any services that need to be built into IEPs or otherwise, or services that they have to be met, and we have a process in place now. Well, it's not as if we didn't have a process in place, but we've re-articulated a process for parents to communicate or otherwise. I don't have that scope, to be honest with you, Katie, and I've reviewed it with Shirley, and I'd be happy to review it again. But I would encourage people to go through Shirley in terms of specific services, because we have a reporting system to make up, and we have a system of when we're reporting back to parents under what circumstances, the frequency of anything missed. And so I would encourage that dialogue to take place, because I just don't want to miss representation.
No, I appreciate that. I think, that there's really two implications, right? And one is that the children are making their services and that our program is tracking things accurately. But, for today's purpose, the budgetary implications of, I'm just curious about what risk we might be at, that money might have to be returned to the state based on these projections and just how that worked.
So it's only the money that would occur that was forecasted from March 1st to June 30th. So we assume a certain amount's going to happen. If those services didn't end up happening, and again, it has to be an actual excess cost eligible student.
Right.
So if services are missed and they don't reach that threshold,
Right.
it's a non-issue. Then you would have to return it. The reason it gets attached to ECS is because if you owe money, we don't typically cut a check. What they do is they just kind of claw back what they owe you in terms of the reimbursement, which is why they usually attach it to ECS.
But
But the bottom line is, we're not going to lose, if there were services for some reason for a family or a child or otherwise, those aren't going to be missed if they're added, if they happen to be added or otherwise. It's not if we're going to miss an opportunity, they're still going to be provided the services.
Thank you.
Any other questions? So, and I know some of this was highlighted in the interim with the Board of Finance as they were going through the budget. So thanks for the clarity in the memo in the meantime. And the Board of Finance made some adjustments to this year's budget surplus based on this information, and then as well as a forecast change to next year's fiscal year budget based on services that were being rendered at a school that now is accredited, correct?
So the services for the ones for next year
Yeah.
are two students that we weren't able to necessarily
Yeah.
claim in the December 1st filing. So there was a reduction to the budget of a little over $100,000, which related to additional ECR forecasted revenue for fiscal 24. At some point, the board will then have to just make a reconciliation of the budget.
Yeah, and these were two items that came after we addressed the Board of Education budget and passed it. So, correct. Okay. Just quickly on the grants and
No, John, one quick
sorry.
question on this. No,
sorry,
thanks.
Dennis. Yeah.
Rich, just for clarification for me, this does not include the advanced purchases we made for next year's budget off of the prior surplus we had, correct? So that would give us a total of around $1 million.
So it does include the pre-purchases. So if we didn't do the pre-purchases, we'd be a little over $1 million in terms of.
Okay, thank you. Perfect.
Yeah, we did those
The last month.
transfers.
Great. Yep, just clarifying.
Appreciate it. Yeah,
And-
no.
Rich, just out of curiosity, sorry, Joe.
Yeah, go ahead.
If you took out all this, the increased ECR reimbursement, how tight would we be running our budget?
So if you took out the ECR reimbursement and then you took out the pre-purchases, we would probably be about like 350 or so. But part of that also includes the mid-year hires for the security proposal and then the director of mental health.
Okay.
So there was a lot of moving pieces this year in terms of the mid-year ads for staff and then the pre-purchases. So if you add it all, we'll probably be about 700,000 if you take out the SSOs and the director of mental health. Probably 2/3 of that were those 3 elementary sections that ended up not meeting enrollment.
Thanks.
So yeah, if you just quickly on the grants and
So in terms of food service, not much change from the previous month. We did have a profit through February of just over 138,000, fund balance forecasted at $570,000. We are forecasting a positive balance at the end of the year of just over $225,000. And we are going to go forward with that. We discussed at the last meeting, the purchase of some equipment out of our fund balance. In terms of the grants, there aren't many changes. It is all the same grants that we had at the previous meeting. We do again have that balance of the ARP ESSER funds, which have to be expended by June 30th of 2024, so a year from now. And that balance is about $88,000.
budget transfers.
So there is one recommended transfer for approval. It is for the English warrant. Correct that. It is for 1,080, and we are recommending taking the funds from the savings from the annual audit out of RC20.
Seems like a no-brainer to me.
Yep.
So we'll bring that forth to the board with the recommendation to approve that transfer. Okay. So the last item is a item we typically don't go over, but stems from the last discussion and a charge from the Board of Ed to look over our fiscal year 25 draft budget calendar. And the reason we're doing that now, as a fiscal year 24 town budget hasn't yet been approved and the Board of Ed budget hasn't yet been approved, is one, just a recency effect and making sure that we have the process in mind and what went well, what didn't go well. But two, the implications it has for the administration in terms of developing its strategic plan, new initiatives, new programs. I mean, that all has to start to get rolling basically after the current budget season finishes. So it's really important. We looked at this a couple times based on some board discussions, and we're going to discuss this today and maybe have some recommendations and discussion points to bring back to the board at Tuesday's meeting. And time is of the essence, if you will. Not to say that we're not going to listen or rush this through, but so administration has time to kind of set up its budget calendar. So I think one of the tasks that we asked was administration to come back with a revised draft budget calendar and also the memo around the commentary why we're thinking about what we're thinking about. But I kind of wanted to start at a highlight, the email that I sent out to the 2 RTM committee chairs and Jim Palin, the Board of Finance, is kind of the essence of why we're trying to do this. And it's, again, allow the discussions around policy, new programs, everything that's not budget related to occur before we get to budget season. Because we have been criticized and internally and externally that, we address some new items within the budget cycle and we spend too much time on the policy issues and not enough time on the budget. So that's critical. The Q&A process we discussed last week, Rich said there were 240 questions, but that number has grown with the Board of Finance questions. I'm sure that number is going to grow with RTM related questions. So we do want to receive questions, but find a way to better streamline them and reduce redundancy along those. And so I think that's really important. And how we receive them, I think we'll discuss it as a committee and as a board, but I think it'd be more suitable or appropriate that the questions come into the board, addressed to the board, and the board works through its own questions and the questions we receive from the public, and then task the administration to answer those kind of loose ends, if you will, and weed out the policy related questions that aren't tied to the budget. We want interactive dialogue. I mean, I'll say it once, I'll say it 10 times. I think this budget season, we got tremendous and awesome feedback from fellow elected officials, parents, parent-teacher organizations, CDSP. So we don't want to stem the flow of that, but again, kind of reorganize it so it happens at appropriate moments. I mean, I said it and a few others have said it. We got a lot of commentary. Why aren't you asking these questions? And, why aren't you raising these issues? Well, we just had received the superintendent's budget, not really had the chance to ask our own questions. So we are not going to stifle any feedback, questions, answers, suggestions, but we just want to make sure that the appropriate order occurs. So they happen at the same time. And then we've been asked to have an enhanced 5-year budget outlook. And I think we can do that. We already talked about some ideas, like, based on some changes we're going to see in the food service and adding, in the FTEs, we know based on some of the programs we've changed, that sort of thing. I think we can get more detail on. So I'll leave it at that. Do you have anything else you'd like to say?
Yeah, I would just do high level commentary on it. Actually, Julie, Jack, and Joanne, there's good morning to you. There are a couple of
Oh yeah, Jack, there's
extra packets here if you're interested, because I'm going to refer to like 3 memorandums here. There is a narrative memorandum that's on the board there. So I'll just talk in generalities for a moment. That speaks to potential budget items or topics that the board has identified and where would they be addressed. So we obviously have to talk as a full board. Does this cover the needs? Have we captured everything? Have we not captured everything? So in that memorandum, we've sort of outlined to simplify it, where those discussions would actually take place, because it's okay saying all these things, but if we don't schedule them or we don't plan the time for them, they're not going to happen. Right? It's going to get just difficult. So we have done a review of where we might be able to do those, and you can see that for the most part, where they come to the full board, and the meeting before would be the Board of Ed subcommittee prior to that month, so to speak. Now, you don't have to agree with all those forums, but this is kind of how we are sort of like at least talking to it a little bit. So you can see where they would be there. Some of the things in that memorandum cover the 2 other calendars that were produced. We split the budget calendar, proposed budget calendar that traditionally we would have, and that we kind of all follow. And we did a sort of pre-budget development, which sort of ties to that memorandum, because it's all sort of tying together at the moment. So I'll speak real quickly to the pre-one. It's reiterating the list that's in that memorandum of what we've identified. The budget FY25 and the budget FY26 is a way of us saying, look, I don't know that we're going to be able to do everything for this budget year. Now, you don't have to agree with them, but we can have a discussion, because we have to complete these tasks, and there's heavy lifting involved and so on and so forth. And there's different reasons for the timing of both, but you can see the ones that we're trying to get ready for FY25 and the ones that we're trying to get ready for FY26. We also discussed that idea of a budget, multi-year budget. I need to discuss with this committee and also the full board, what does that mean? At what level? We can flesh it out in a level of certain level of detail, or we can flesh it out at a big level, high level. It may be more detailed that the board is looking for, which is fine, as long as we know what we all agree on, what we're looking for there for the 5 years. So you can see just the Board of Ed meetings and so on and so forth that discuss these things. That aligns to the memorandum I just talked about. So for the most part, that just talks about Board of Education processes, meetings where we're going to talk about these issues. So the budget calendar in itself, what it does is try to, in all honesty, Rich and I went through it. I also went through it with the curriculum department just to make sure we're on par with that. Obviously taking into consideration what the board has said. So we tried to look at ways of perhaps realizing efficiencies and improving processes for participation in that particular process. So throughout this process here, you can see some things are still in place, like the Saturday still in place. There are a couple of other opportunities that are defined. One is when we sort of, it doesn't preclude receiving feedback from the respective boards at any particular time. Right? I mean, we would always be responsive, but there's a sort of opportunity sort of timeline where we could receive all of these. And hopefully what preceded that helped the boards have input into that process. And hopefully that the respective boards will have the time to schedule a meeting to discuss it before they're actually doing that and that consideration. We have also put in place here a couple of opportunities, a special board meeting. These are proposals, and I just named proposal that there's a special board meeting where the respective chairs, Board of Finance, RTMs come and be at the table, and we have a discourse about the questions and have a back and forth. and if that would particularly serve that
So,
purpose.
so let's just use dates for those
Yep.
that might be following along online. So, typically, the calendar's not, the timeline of the calendar is not changing, but, they approve, we'll get the approval of the calendar in the fall by the board. And then you moved the tour of the schools up to December 9th now.
Yes,
That's
that's
a big
correct.
change,
Uh-huh.
okay? And then December 21, the budget books are basically when you say receives budget books, that's a superintendent's proposed budget. So if
Correct.
you could
Yep.
add that.
Uh-huh.
So that's December 21st. That doesn't really change the timeline.
No, so I'm also trying to, in this process, can we clarify? We might as well annotate who gets budget books, when they get the budget books, what nature of the budget books, because it relatively can change every year and it just gets confusing down the stretch. And actually it gets complicated because when you're dealing with shipping these budget books out to be done and so on, so it just gets, so the respective need for them or otherwise. I have put in here that the 21st, the board receives their printed budget books. The RCs receive those printed budget books will be published on the website. And the respective committees, according to the schedule, would receive the budget book on January 4th, the day that the superintendent's proposed budget is actually released.
But you have proposed that it's also up on the website.
Correct, yes.
Over
Right.
break. So
Which that's a
yes.
change, right?
Yes, yes,
Yeah.
that's a change.
Yeah, why do you have that, Alan? Sorry.
Why do I have in that order?
Why are you publishing before you present?
I'm trying to thread a needle of being responsive to some past practices, change in practices, actually needs versus sometimes we publish things and sometimes people don't actually need them. I'm also sort of honoring the process a wee bit of the board gets theirs in advance and also not going crazy before the proposed budget is actually on the table a little bit. So I'm just trying to thread the needle and read the community and the boards actually what the needs are versus what is helpful and also just
My 2 cents personally, I would rather have the budget published on the website when the superintendent presents the budget on that same day. So after the budget is presented, then it goes on the website. And so the Board of Education and the cabinet have the winter break or the Christmas, whatever you want to call it, the 2 weeks there to review their budgets in private and formulate their own questions without having the public comment because they can see it on a website.
So I know there's going to be comments on this, but I might have a suggestion.
Yep.
Can we check with legal staff? If you give it to us, I believe that would be a public document and be foiable at that point. So can you just,
technically that is correct.
yeah, so can we just get that way in and then as a board, we can decide on Tuesday whether or not we can
Fair
even
enough.
do that, Dennis? Does that
Good
make
point.
sense?
Yeah, good point,
Okay.
John.
Is that okay with everybody else?
I will say that it's just historically, it's an unusual practice, right? Usually superintendents and boards receive their full packet the same day as the superintendent presents his or her actual budget. So that's typically what happens, but I'm just trying to honor some.
Okay,
things
so
there.
let's just, if that's okay.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean,
Thank you.
we could talk about, and I do think a lot of this conversation has to be with the 9 of us, not.
Oh, yeah,
just the 4 of
absolutely.
us. So I'm fine tabling this till Tuesday.
Well, and again, remember, we only come with recommendations. We don't make decisions.
Yep,
You know, we're
yep.
tasked with kind of doing this, raising this issue, right? So now we don't have to cover it. It's going to be answered by our hopefully Tuesday board meeting, and then we will make a decision as a board.
So on January 4th, you'll notice, Mr. Chairman, that I delineated how many books were going for the actual respective committees and then the actual other sort of organizations. I'm not deliberately leaving people out or adding them in. This is kind of
What you've done.
what
in
I'm
the past.
thinking is relatively, we have sort of done in the past. Continues to come up in terms of, are we continuing to do that? So I've named those there. If that's not the case, then we can discuss
I
that
think
too.
we had talked about an opt-in for that, for those members that somehow getting a Google Doc or survey or whatever, so that you're only printing. We don't need to print kill excess trees if we don't need to. So
Is that a manageable process for an opt-in process for the administration to manage?
Opt-in, well, it'll always, on the 4th, it'll be published on the website, so that's a
Right.
given, right?
Right.
So is the question an opt-in for
Hard copy?
Right.
hard
Yeah.
copies?
Yes.
What's the-
fine.
That's
Okay, yeah, so I would suggest that too. I mean, these budget books, if you haven't seen them, how many pages?
A few hundred each at least.
300 each. And how many books do you ultimately print typically?
One
What-
other just quick suggestion.
Hold on
I'm
one
sorry.
second. Do you know the cost to print all the books? Roughly?
I mean, the main cost is obviously the paper and the tabs. It's a little over $1,000.
Okay, a lot of trees or half a tree. Go ahead, Katie.
I think it would be helpful if, especially since it's going online and early, if instead of one enormous file that downloaded, especially to encourage people maybe not to have a book if they're not going through every line item and have specific interest, if it's possible to break it up into sort of a more interactive document so that you can click links by sections, maybe by RC or something, I think it would help to be able to navigate
Online.
online. Yes. And so that way, maybe if the online one was a little more user friendly, less people would opt in for the paper.
So I think of the town plan of conservation development, I believe you can go and get to each chapter. So you don't have to scroll through 300 pages on a PDF. I don't know. Can you guys see if you can? Yeah, that-
There's probably a way to put like hyperlinks on the.
yeah,
table of
For
contents.
HRC.
Thank you.
a good improvement.
nice idea. I like that a lot. Okay, so we're now through January 4th. So bottom line, if it's a foyable document, I think we all agree that it should be available to the public once it's issued to us. I don't want to hold it up until January 4th from the board. Is that an agreement as well?
What do you mean that?
So if it's foyable, we got to put it online December
I see what you're
21st.
saying.
Alan said it's not common.
John, there's a difference between publishing and making it available. So just to be clear, you could have it, everyone could own it. And under FOIA, someone would have the right to ask for it. You don't actually have to publish it. That's an additional.
I understand, but if it's foyable, I would very much prefer it's public. So let's make it public. But no one wants to hold it back till January 4th from the board, correct?
From the board? No, no.
No,
Okay. thank you. Okay, then January 6th. Oh, no, then you do January 4th, the presentation is proposed budget. That's typical.
Yep.
And then January 6th, regular Board of Education meeting, and that's Super Saturday. Okay, so one of the questions that I've heard has been posed to us is, are we doing the Q&A similarly? My answer is that is a decision of the chair at the time. They run the meetings, they determine whether or not, with board input, of course, how to structure their meetings. So I don't really think it's in our purview to make a recommendation on how the Q&A is answered. I think upon budget season next year, Duke, whoever's the chair, gets to, delineate that with administration. Again, there's no intent to kind of stifling things. If I was running the meeting, I wouldn't poll every single entity after every single item, because if you added up the time just saying RTM committee, it's probably a good 20 minutes of the day by polling each one. I would say any questions, and then you take the questions. That's just my recommendation. However, it's the chair's purview, so I don't know if we want to get into that, but. you tell
I don't
me.
know that we need to get into it, but I do want to make sure that the people that are in that room on Saturday can raise questions. I don't want, I forget the wording in here, but it was like, whatever. I just want to
Public
make sure that
comments.
everybody can
Absolutely.
ask questions
Absolutely.
on that day, that we are not stifling
Nope.
that.
That
Because
wouldn't-
I actually find some of those questions really helpful, because it may not be something that I thought about when I went through the budget. So it's valuable to me to have people ask questions.
Now, I do think it's very important the questions are addressed to the board going forward,
Mm-hmm.
though, because I think, again, as I've said before, I don't have the opportunity, even as a board member, to go to Rich and ask a question
Mm-hmm.
directly. We typically have to go through Alan, and we typically, as a board, ask the administration questions, not single individuals. So I think that's going to be a nuance that, again, the chair next year can kind of work through. But I think that will also, address the question of the board, then we can figure out which questions we want ultimately answered. But again, reiterating, participation is deeply important to us from both the community, parents, parent-teacher organizations, and fellow elected officials. January 9th.
So that's a general follow-up. That's just a general follow-up board meeting that we have. And then the 12th is really what we're suggesting between the 4th and the 12th. And like I have to I don't know, for instance, Jack or any other board members, challenges in being able to put together questions in that time period, but we're looking to see between the 4th and the 12th, by the 12th, can we get a series of questions? It's not going to preclude other questions coming whenever they have them, but it might just sort of simplify it a little bit. At least that's the suggestion. So
Organize, reduce redundancy, weed out the questions that have nothing to do with the budget. You know, all those would be the goals there.
and then
Again, if the questions are coming to the board, then we as a board have to determine, you know, which questions move forward to the administration. Okay, so there's got to be a point in which we, you know, go through and, you know, basically approve or give you guidance on which questions to answer.
Yeah. John, I think that's the part that's missing for me on this January 12th, because it seems like it's, the way I'm reading this is the Board of Finance RTM are submitting questions that the school will submit answers sometime January 23rd, I'm guessing. That's the way I'm reading this document.
18th.
The 18th. For me, I think I'm with you, John. I think there's a step in here that the board goes through and because this is still our document and it's not the public. So I'm struggling with having transparency and allowing questions, but I also don't want 250 questions answered by administration. And I think we need a filter, as I think you were saying, that to go through those questions at this point.
Yeah, so is there, I guess the question is, should we move that up to the 9th so we can, before the 9th meeting, so we can at least have an initial group of questions that has been vetted by the board? that have been addressed to the board?
Well, you won't really have them until the 12th, because to do them before them is probably not going to give the committees a reasonable
I
opportunity
think
to.
that's true. And I think that we will have some questions from Super Saturday
Yeah.
that, you know, when Marge, you know, takes those great notes that she does. Some of those questions, you know, we can go through those questions and there will be some that will need answering that are, you know, will not be policy.
So why
questions.
don't we give a deadline of the 12th? You're going to get more questions the 18th. And then the 18th will be that kind of, it gives you 2 weeks until 23rd. So the 18th, we'll have everybody in the room together, Board of Finance, RTM, F&B, parents, everybody, community members. And we can use that meeting to kind of vet all the questions. And you have 2 weeks to come back with answers on the 23rd. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
And you guys will know if there's direct budget related questions.
Yeah, I wouldn't get too cumbersome because
Understood.
that ends up slowing the process down too back and
But-
forward.
but
Which
you
ones
will-
are which ones?
What my point is there's a straight budget related question, you'll know that that's appropriate to answer
of
too.
course.
That hasn't been asked, so, okay.
John, a question I would ask the committee to consider is, we're talking about this in terms of questions, which might be something like, what does this line item of this RC mean? But historically, we've also gotten other types of feedback from from our fellow government bodies, whether it's at the highest level of guidance to, you know, other things like, are you thinking about forecasting? So this is written as questions, but my question to you guys is, what about feedback, higher level feedback? How are you wanting that to go?
Why don't we put questions / comments on every point of this document that you have questions, okay?
Well, that's clearly the purpose of bringing perhaps the chairs and so on, committees to the actual
So
table.
that meeting on the 18th.
I like the timeline because it gives us, you know, ample time as a board to kind of go through things, receive input, questions, and then bring everybody together for kind of that input. I mean, and I think it's only like a 2 weeks slide from what we experienced this year.
I think the rest of the dates sort of flow with the general process, other than the joint perhaps meeting. Mr. Davis was nice enough to try and did organize a sort of joint meeting. If that's something that they feel is appropriate, fine. If it's not, then that's another discussion. So, but that's.
And again, I mean, will be up to you and the chair at the time, but you know, I see this as like a 3-step process in that, well, maybe even 4. Your proposed budget comes to the board. While we're deliberating it and discussing it and receiving questions and comments, those bodies that want to participate should be coming to our meetings, right? And then we hand it off to the Board of Finance. And if there's any more additional comments, questions, tied to the Board of Education's approved budget within the Board of Finance's discussion. They go to the Board of Finance table, right? So you've been invited or told not to show up at meetings. And then, when it gets handed to the RTM, same thing. If there are still outstanding questions, issues that are outstanding, board chair and administration would go and address the RTM committees. And I hope, as you said, Mr. Davis has organized a kind of a combined meeting, so it doesn't take up too much of your time and you can answer all the questions coming from the RTM. I think that's a great structure,
And I think the only point I would make to your, and I agree your structure is solid. The point, the caveat, if that's the right word, is the first two steps in the process, you can still fight to put something in the budget. The last two steps of the budget, you can only remove. Well, maybe the Board of Finance can add. Board of Finance can add,
Correct,
Mhm.
correct.
but the RTM cannot.
So they're
But the Board of Finance can only add money. They can't add a program.
correct.
So to me, there's a,
Capital too, right?
yeah, but there's a fundamental part in there that only while it's our budget can we specifically tie monies to programs or initiatives.
No, you can tell me later, Jack, okay? So,
Could I just be clear about this?
Yeah.
I just want to be clear about what I just said there, just it might help. That idea of the joint meeting. I'm not asking respective boards to call joint meetings. This is a meeting of the Board of Education at which we are calling all of them to the table.
what would give me the date?
That doesn't preclude people having their separate meetings, us doing something else.
Hold on. So wait,
March 9th.
we have two meetings. Okay, special Board of Education meeting, including chair designation from Board of Finance, RTM, F&B, and RTM Education Committee. That's January 18th, okay?
Yep.
And then we go to March 19th.
Yes. Those are Board of Education where we're proposing to invite the respective board chairs and so on to those meetings.
But you then might be invited to go to their meetings in front of their boards as they deliberate the Board of Education budget.
Yeah, of course.
So is that not redundant at that point? Because our budget has been approved.
Well, I think we need to work with the respective
Okay,
boards to
yeah,
see
that's what I
what
was
is actually
thinking,
going to work
yeah.
here, right? What's the best? What I don't want to see happen is do all these changes and then we do exactly what we did
No.
in any other given year on top of it. Now, so
No.
even more confusion or more
Meetings.
meetings or just, I think there's a level of efficiency we're trying to get at, but we need to do that in collaboration with the respective
Yeah.
board chairs.
I mean, there might be I guess the way I see it, when the Board of Finance deliberates the Board of Education's approved budget, they might have outstanding questions. A perfect one was the budget changes that occurred after our approved budget, right? So it's helpful to either have a response or you there, if you will. And they'll invite you if they need you. And I feel like that's the same way the RTM would be at the point in which they receive the Board of Finance's approved budget. So, again, you can work with the chair and therefore this might not even be needed, right? So, I put the March 19th if needed,
Rich, is there anything I missed in there just in terms of?
I think the idea was for the one in January, it was a chance for the other government bodies to give comments, feedback, input on the superintendent's budget, which might be comments that the Board of Ed might not be thinking about at the time. And then the March 19th meeting was to give feedback on what's ultimately the board's budget at that time,
Okay.
similar to what the Board of Finance does at their March.
Okay. I mean, I'm not fighting. I just don't know if it's going to be needed or not.
It might
Yeah,
not be
yeah,
dependent
yeah.
on what happens between the differences.
Okay.
Budget.
Go
At
ahead.
one point, we were talking about, and I think Dennis was talking about this too, where the public hearing fell. Are we comfortable with this? And I actually also, I'm noticing the ad cut is listed on this twice. Is that
Give me the dates if you could.
the 23rd of January?
So the 23rd is for actual requests to go up on when the board actually makes decisions to
Okay.
put something up.
Okay,
And then the one on
the 6th.
the 6th is when there's a discussion on what got put up.
Okay.
And then
that's
obviously you're
the-
voting on the budget.
Okay, so that's the vote versus the. And if that's the case, then I like having the public hearing prior to the 6th. I think that makes sense.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I agree, Sarah. To me, that allows us to, digest the special hearing or the public hearing, sorry. And then if we want to take action on those points, we can raise them on the 6th.
Yeah, and that's exactly how we changed it like a year or so
Yeah,
ago.
and I thought it worked well.
Yeah, it worked great. Okay. And then the rest flows through based on the charter
The charter.
and, yeah. And ends with the town budget meeting. Okay. So that was the calendar. There are, I guess, the issues that have been listed that have been defined by the board. I don't know if that really falls under the purview of us. I would just take it to the board. So it's a great start and I appreciate it. But I don't think that we need to discuss that here because it really has nothing to do with the budget calendar. It has to do with more the annual calendar or the master agenda.
Yeah, the only tacit connection is just that these are the issues that are potentially feeding into the. But that's-
Absolutely.
But understood.
I think that's great. I'm wondering, am I missing anything? Anybody else have any comments?
No.
So,
So there's a space on the agenda for this Tuesday night, correct? Yes.
Yes, correct.
I guess what I would do is, you guys have a couple small changes to bring to the board. We have the issue around when it gets published to talk to the board. And then the question of the deadline to receive questions and how we vet the questions as a board before administration kind of runs through. But I think we kind of fixed that also. Just put the 18th.
So,
Okay.
yeah, no, I think,
And maybe March 19th, just put if needed in parentheses. That fit with everybody?
Yes.
Okay. Any other questions on this before we go to public comment? All right, I think we're gonna go to public comment. We'll start in here first.
Okay,
Michelle.
good morning. Anyone in person would like, please state your name and address for
I
the
would
record.
sit, if you could just sit down up. Joanna, you can move up closer and just, if the mic's, I don't know if that mic's working.
Hi,
Feel free to sit.
Joanna Walsh, 17 Pleasant Street. I'm relieved to hear that the opportunity for community partners like PTOs and CPAC to ask questions on Super Saturday is staying the same. I would love some clarification around the idea that I thought I heard you say that the parties will all ask questions to the board and then the board decides if the questions are relevant and if admin will answer them. And that could just be me misunderstanding, but if on Tuesday you guys could clarify that, that would be great. My other question is actually about ECR, which I admittedly am still trying to figure out. But if I was just wondering if Rich, and you might have said this, I'm sorry, I know I can't actually ask questions to Rich. You might have said this and I missed it. The majority of the missed services happened before December. I mean, there's still some going on. So does that mean that the filing was amended so that none of the ECR kids lost their, were submitted for those services that they didn't get? And you might have already said that. So thank you.
So I think I'll address the committee in terms of the first question. Second one, I don't want to touch because it's not on our agenda. So that's a great suggestion. We'll clarify that with the board. One thing I will mention and remind folks is that PTOs, CDSP also have a private meeting with you regarding your proposed budget, correct? When I say not private, but a direct meeting, when you bring your proposed budget, don't you create a?
Only after it's
Yeah.
presented.
Understood.
Yeah.
But you have that opportunity to sit with
Yeah,
CDSP.
yeah, we do. We do.
Yeah.
We-
And I don't
we
mean
meet
private, I
monthly.
mean,
We meet-
it's
well,
open to all
We
members.
meet monthly.
Okay, got it. Anybody else? No? Anybody online?
Anyone online would like to participate? There are no raised hands at this time.
Perfect. So could I get a motion to adjourn? Second,